Good afternoon. I'm Don David, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about starting photography. Every person today is a photographer. So many people, in fact, practically all of us have smartphones. So if you have a smartphone, you basically have a camera. Actually, you have a small computer that has a camera. And the camera allows you to do certain things, but it's very limited in many respects from what it can do. So I'd like to talk to you and tell you about a few thoughts I have on how you might want to go if you'd like to get started to the next level of photography. Okay? So, let's talk a little bit about photo beginnings. What's involved? We've all seen video programs and photographs from National Geographic, and photography is such a wonderful field because without it we would not know 1/10 of what we know about nature, animals, flowers, etc. So what you'll be able to do if you pursue photography to the next level is capture a moment in time that you've recorded that may never be repeated again. So here's some thoughts that I had. First of all, you have to consider a few aspects of what's involved in a photograph. There's such a thing as dynamic range, and what that means is the ability to see from pure black to pure white. And your eye is an amazing device because it can see shadows which many cameras cannot see. So that's what we mean by dynamic range, the ability of the camera to see as much as can be made available like your eye sees. Another important aspect is depth of field. Just like when you look at a bright light, the irises in your eyes narrow, they start to close, and you can see from near to far. As your eyes open, if your eyes are dilated, for example, the iris opens and you have the amount of light coming in bothers you because you cannot tolerate a bright light and you cannot focus as well as you did before. So this is aperture. The camera has that. It's called f-stop. And it goes from a wide f-stop, which is a small number, to a large f-stop, which is a small number, and a very wide aperture, a small aperture, which is a high number. Resolution. This is the ability of the device, of the camera's sensor, to resolve definitions between colors and between scenes. The greater the number of pixels in today's cameras, including smartphones, results in a change in resolution. Shutter speed. If you want to capture a bird flying, you have to use a high speed, and with many simple devices such as smartphones, you can't set this. You have to take whatever it gives you. And the device, which is a wonderful device, calculates all of these things for you. As you go into photography to the next level, these things you can specify to enhance the beauty and the resolution and the definition of your camera. Macro image usage, this is another aspect where you want to focus in closely to illustrate the details of a flower, for example. Composition. Well, needless to say, that's a lengthy topic which we won't go into today. ISO exposure. This is the sensitivity of the device to light. Subject matter. If you're actually getting into photography, you want to choose something which is probably unique, at least unique for you. And all of these depend certainly on personal preferences. And serendipity. Now, what do I mean by that? When you come across something that you've never seen before, that happens instantaneously, you want to be prepared to take a picture of it. That's serendipity. But serendipity comes if you are prepared and then something happens, you might be able to catch it, which you normally would not be. Processing of the image we'll talk about. And the wonderful thing about photography is that you can get a beautiful picture almost from a trash pile by isolation. You can focus in on a given topic, on a given subject, and isolate all the extraneous details which would not make a pleasant photograph at all. The first thing you have to consider is cameras versus cell phones. I've seen some wonderful photographs with cell phones, and they work just beautifully, the cameras in them. And now they're improving them all the time. In fact, some cell phones now have multiple lenses, so that you do have a telephoto lens, a wide-angle lens, etc. And these take beautiful pictures. And you might be, maybe that's all you need. Maybe that satisfies you. But as long as the lighting is proper and everything else is as it should be, that cell phone camera will do a wonderful job. But if you want to progress beyond taking a selfie or some very simple photographs, you may want to consider cameras. And as soon as you talk about cameras, there are basically two types. One is called a full frame camera, and this is essentially what a film camera, a 35 millimeter camera, was in its day. So the distance across a strip of film is 36 millimeters. So that's the standard. So that's essentially what we mean by a full frame camera. At APS-C or smaller, the sensor now is less than a 35 millimeter size. And I'll show you that in a moment. And then there are all kinds of brands and types. Where do you start? How do you begin? Plus, if you go to a camera, basically it takes photographs in two ways. It takes it directly. It's called a JPEG, and which is a format that is interchangeable between many different types of computers and other devices. Whether it's a Mac or a Windows or something else, they all immediately recognize JPEGs. But there's also, the camera will also take a raw image, which is the image just as the sensor in the camera sees it. Okay, let's go to the next consideration. Here I want to show you what the differences are. This is the size of the full frame. The APS-C, you see, This is 36 by 24. The APS-C goes down. There's something called 4/3, which is the next size. Then there are high-end compacts and low-mid compacts. And then finally at the end we have mobile cameras, which are cell phones. So the cell phone camera has the smallest sensor available, and that has a very large effect on the quality of the image produced. The high-end DSLRs, Canons, the Nikons, the Sonys, and so on, produce cameras in this range, which vary in functions from something simple to something complex and professional. And each one step up gives you more bells and whistles, which you may not need or may not want. Now, mid-range are the entry levels. These are other Canon, Nikon, Sonys, and so on that will also take wonderful photographs. Then the Olympus, which is the 4/3, and then we go to the high-end compacts. Now these are generally, or at least many of them, are not lens interchangeable. They have lenses which go from wide angle to telephoto, and everything is included in the camera, and in one fell swoop you can go from wide angle to telephoto, and the camera does all the settings and all the work for you. And then the low mid compacts, these take also nice photographs, but as you go down in size, the amount of light reaching the sensor, as you see, decreases. Your resolution goes down, your ability to take a nice photograph in the dark decreases, and this is what tends to happen. But if you're satisfied with what you're able to get with a cell phone camera, that's perfectly fine. Just remember that you will not be able to adjust much for varying light conditions. You will not be able to change the aperture, which affects the amount of the image that's in focus. So in the cell phone camera, you will not be able to enlarge the photograph. As long as you're taking photographs, selfies and so on, and you just want to look at them on your computer, a cell phone camera is perfectly fine. Now, to further illustrate, I've illustrated here for you firsthand the differences that I've just discussed with the equipment is going to do for you. And you can see, if you're focusing, if you're trying to take a picture of this lovely young lady, this is the full frame. The orange is the APS-C, the lime is the 4/3, the light blue, the 2/3, and way at the end, the dark blue, is the cell phone camera. So you see there's quite a large difference. I won't go into the mathematics of it, but if the area is tremendously different, and the amount of light hitting the sensor will determine to a large extent the ability of the device to determine the resolution and the amount of detail that you can pull from the darkness. Now, let's assume that you're thinking about getting started. Where do you begin? Well, you got to consider camera brands, prices, which is your budget, and the types. Which one is best for you? Well, the place to start is really right here. This is the URL, which will give you a tremendous amount of information to begin. Let me illustrate that for you. Now, I pulled up on the other monitor this site, and it has all sorts of articles on it about cameras, but right here, under this buying guides, look what they have. Best cameras under 500, best cameras under 1,000, and these were all carefully evaluated by experts. They have best lenses for this, for Canons, Nikons, Sonys. These are just recommendations. These are all buying guides. They have sample images of each of these cameras from the low end to the high end. And then under cameras, you can go to any make that you've heard about or know about. And if you click on it, for example, Nikon, it will show you all, give you all the cameras that are current or available from the past few years, along with the prices. So there's a tremendous amount of information here. And then you can, and if there are forums for each of these, which you may not initially want to get into, but the buying guides, the reviews, the cameras, the prices, this will give you all of this information. And this is a good thing to do before you go into a camera store and check out the device you read about. You'll be informed, you'll be able to make a better decision. If you get started, you then want to advance your knowledge. How do you do this? Well, there are books on this, and the internet has many articles. But at some point, you probably want hands-on help at courses. And I highly recommend hands-on help. If you go in the field with somebody who's been through this, the hints they gave you and the suggestions they have, very, very helpful. And you can do this through photo talks and photo shoots, and there are New England camera clubs as well that can help you with this information. What's the next step? Well, if you get a camera, you take pictures. You have to get the pictures that you've taken in the camera onto the computer. There's a number of ways to do this. Once you have a camera, it will have a little solid state chip in it, and it may look something like this. And the photos on this will go into the computer. You can transfer them from that little digital flash drive in your computer, in your camera, to the computer, but it doesn't end there. You need software in order to process that photo. Now, what comes with most computers, with all computers that I know of, is built-in software so that it will recognize JPEGs. Like I told you before, this is a universal format, and you can see the JPEG, but your editing ability is practically nil. So there are two ways to go here. The first way is, if you buy a camera, a digital camera, the manufacturer will offer you free software with that camera that you can use to process the image. But that software is generally fairly limited in what it can do. But you probably need to try it out to see if you like it. But there are many other programs that are available that do a super job, many of which are too expensive. And I've just listed a few of them here. For example, Capture One. If you buy a Sony camera, you can get a very elegant program called Capture One, which is free, but it only processes Sony images. So if you also have a digital camera that is a Canon, a Nikon, an Olympus, or something else, it will not process that. PaintShop Pro, Adobe Photoshop Elements, Adobe Lightroom, Adobe Photoshop itself, the original, and of course, as I just talked about, software supplied with the camera. But bear in mind, the image that comes in from the camera to the computer is the image that the sensor has seen, and that's all. Unless you adjust the image in the camera, there's no enhancement of the image, and what you're seeing is whatever that particular sensor records. Now, if you want to take the next step, this is an example of Hunt's, which is our local photo store here in the valley. For example, here's Beginning Photography in the Field. This is in East Boston. Easy to get to, and they have some great people teaching these courses. Hunt's Photo Walk, Franklin Park Zoo. Multi-session series, editing in Adobe Lightroom Classic. And then they have a session on advanced photography. Now, as I explained at the beginning, the sensor takes images in two ways, either JPEGs or raw images. Now, most of the cell phone do not shoot raw images, they shoot JPEGs. And that's, so what the software the software associated with the camera will take the image of the light falling on the sensor and translate it into that format. And at that point, you're very limited in what you can do about it. But if you take the raw image in and this is an important aspect, the raw image, if you shoot the raw image and then transfer that in the computer, this is as the sensor sees it, and you can work with that image time and time again, and the image will not be destroyed. If you work with a JPEG and change it, you won't be able to change it back, because that will be it. So you will have to work with a copy. Okay, what I'd like to do now is show you the difference between a RAW and a JPEG image. So, for these examples, I set my camera so that it records a RAW and a JPEG at the same time. Many of these cameras, mirrorless cameras, do that. So, I pulled this up on Photoshop. This first image was shot in JPEG, and this image was shot in RAW. Notice the difference in the shadows. See the definition of down here? of the trunks of the trees compared with this. In the properly exposed areas, they're pretty much the same. There's slight differences. But here, the difference is tremendous. So that's the difference between RAW and JPEG and the dynamic range, what I was talking about. The dynamic range is just greatly different. And if you take those two, what I've done is work with them, and I want to show you what the difference is if I try to take the raw image and process it into a finished photograph. Here I've taken that raw image and I've edited it. I won't go through all the details at this point in processing, but notice the difference in the detail as to what this can pull out compared to the JPEG, and this is the best. Each one was treated exactly the same. So this is the best that can be done with an image that is recorded simply in JPEG. The difference you will not see a great amount of difference on those parts of the photograph that are exposed properly with the proper light, and therefore your cell phone photograph will be perfectly fine. But in the dark areas, you have the ability to pull out the detail that makes a nice photograph really a beautiful photograph. Okay, what else can you do? Well, let me give you an example here. I took this image the other day, and it's a photograph of a praying mantis. And it's on a daylily pod, a seed pod. It was just a few weeks ago. And these praying mantises are very curious because it's the only insect that will engage you. I don't know what they're thinking, but notice this guy is engaging with me. He's looking at me. He's not particularly scared. Maybe he's wondering, just what the heck am I? In fact, if you come in close, you can see his eyeballs. He's actually looking at me. So this is a nice photograph, but what can you do with it? Well, if you have an image like this, you want to worry about the composition. So you can simply edit it . So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the composition to something that's more acceptable. Say like that. So the image leads your eye from the left corner to the right corner. And notice also that it's distributed by the rule of thirds. And what we mean here is your eye doesn't set in the center of the photograph. The insect is going across, and it's split evenly into thirds. So if I click on this and say crop, I can get this photograph. Except there are parts of it missing. So what do I do about that? Well, I can use this, which is a in Photoshop, a lasso tool, and I can just circle this and click on backspace. I have content aware set up. I can click OK, and voila, it makes that part of the image. I will do the same down here. I haven't changed the image. I haven't added or subtracted anything. I'm just filling in spaces. And there you are. That's just one example of what can be done. Okay. There's one other thing I'd like to talk about, and that is I've taken a couple photographs to illustrate something to you. There was a Halloween display the other day, last Halloween, a few weeks ago. And this is a raw image. Notice how it takes it in. Notice that the image, if you just take a photograph on program, it adjusts the light so that it adjusts the exposure so that this main field is very nice, and but the problem is properly exposed, but the sky is completely washed out, and there's not too much you can do about that. Because when the image was exposed, in order to highlight all these displays, the sky is so overexposed that you can't retrieve the detail that's there. But I took another photo, and with a digital camera I focused on this, which is what I want to see, all the displays of the skeletons and everything else in this person's yard. But I looked at the sky on the back, and what the image will show is a histogram of the image, and now I can change the exposure so that the highlights are not blown and this is very dark. But look, as I adjust this, what can happen here. For the optics, it will automatically, if I use profile corrections, it will automatically choose the camera and the lens and the model of the lens. I come up here, if I use basic in Photoshop and click auto, look what happens. See all the sky? It brought out, I didn't blow the highlights, the sky at all, the colors of the leaves on the tree, the fall colors, and it exposed the rest of the display just beautifully. So if I click open, now I have my image. I think in one session, I think that's about all I wanted to cover today. So I thank you for tuning in, and good photography.